Hi, I'm Marvin of the Party, and you're watching Oakland NORML News.
Hello, I'm Greg Pisecki in for Mikey Evans, and you are watching the Oakland NORML News. We'll start off today with an editorial entitled Prison Nation. After 3 decades of explosive growth, the nation's population has reached some grim milestones. More than 1 in 100 American adults are behind bars. 1 in 9 black men ages 20 to 34 are serving time, as are 1 in 36 adult Hispanic men. Nationwide, the prison population hovers at almost 1.6 million, which surpasses all other countries for which there are reliable figures. The 50 states last year spent about $44 billion in tax dollars on corrections, up from nearly $11 billion in 1987. Vermont, Connecticut, Delaware, Michigan, and Oregon devote as much money or more to corrections as they do to higher education. These statistics, contained in a new report from the Pew Center on States, point to a terrible waste of money and lives. They underscore the current challenges facing the federal government and cash-strapped states to reduce their over-reliance on incarceration without sacrificing public safety. The key, as some states are learning, is getting smarter about distinguishing between violent criminals and dangerous repeat offenders who need a prison cell, and low-risk offenders who can be handled with effective community supervision, electronic monitoring, and mandatory drug treatment programs, combined in some cases with shorter sentences. Persuading public officials to adopt a more rational, cost-effective approach to prison policy is a daunting prospect, however, not least because building and running jailhouses has become a major industry. Criminal behavior partly explains the size of the prison population, but incarceration rates have continued to rise while crime rates have fallen. Any effort to reduce the prison population must consider the blunderbuss impact of get-tough sentencing laws adopted across the United States beginning in the 1970s. Many Americans have come to believe wrongly that keeping an outsized chunk of the population locked up is essential for sustaining a historical crime drop since the 1990s. In fact, the relationship between imprisonment and crime control is murky. Some portion of the decline is attributable to tough sentencing and release policies, but crime is also affected by things like economic trends, employment, and drug abuse rates. States that lagged behind the national average in rising incarceration rates during the 1990s actually experienced a steeper decline in crime rates than states above the national average, according to the Sentencing Project, a nonprofit group. A rising number of states are broadening their criminal sanctions with new options for low-risk offenders that are a lot cheaper than incarceration but still protect the public and hold offenders accountable. In New York, the crime rate has continued to drop despite efforts to reduce the number of nonviolent drug offenders in prison. The Pew Report spotlights policy changes in Texas and Kansas that have started to reduce the outsized prison populations and address recidivism by investing in ways to improve the success rates for community supervision, expanding treatment and diversion programs, and increasing use of sanctions other than prison for minor parole and probation violations. Recently, the Supreme Court and the United States Sentencing Commission announced sensible changes in the application of harsh mandatory minimum drug sentences. These are signs that the country may finally be waking up to the fiscal and moral cost of bulging prisons. We'll be right back.
Get up, get up, get up, get up, go! Get up, go!
Got stickers? Oakland County NORML does not endorse the random stickering of other people's property, both public and private. All rights reserved.
Welcome back. The BC3 fundraiser in full swing. Oakland County, Michigan, March 27, 2008. Michigan's Oakland County NORML chapter well on their way to raising funds for the BC3 Defense Fund. As of Thursday morning, March 27th, they have collected over $461 in donations that will be matched by a group of wonderful individuals and businesses for a grand total of $921. Their group of sponsors will match up to $520, so there is still more work to do. If you or a group of your friends would like to become a matching sponsor, email Greg at oaklandnormal@comcast.net. This from the Telegraph of Nashua, New Hampshire, March 24th. Representative Frank defends bill to decriminalize small amounts of pot. Boston. Representative Barney Frank is defending a bill he plans to file this week decriminalizing small amounts of marijuana, saying the federal law unfairly targets those using medical marijuana in California. Frank, who filed a bill to decriminalize marijuana as a member of the Massachusetts legislature in the 1970s, said the decision whether to make possession of the drug illegal should be left up to the states. He also said the federal government shouldn't have a law on the books that is rarely enforced and which doesn't make sense to large portions of the public. Do you really think people should be prosecuted for smoking marijuana? I don't think most people agree with that. It's one area where the public is ahead of elected officials, Frank said in an interview with the Associated Press. It does not appear to me to be a law that society is seriously about. Frank said he was particularly troubled by federal law enforcement agencies targeting those using marijuana as a legal medical treatment under California law. I don't think smoking marijuana should be a federal case, he said. There's no federal law against mugging. Marijuana use is illegal under U.S. law, which does not recognize the medical marijuana laws in California and 11 other states. The Drug Enforcement Agency and other U.S. agencies have been shutting down major medical marijuana dispensaries throughout California in the last 2 years and charging their operators with felony distribution charges. Frank first announced the bill on the HBO show Real Time, hosted by Bill Maher. Frank's comments come as pro-marijuana activists are pushing a ballot question that would decriminalize possession of an ounce or less of marijuana in Massachusetts. Instead of facing criminal record, those caught with a small amount of marijuana for personal use would instead pay a civil fine of $100, much like a traffic ticket. Supporters say the measure would save the state millions of dollars in law enforcement costs and spare thousands of state residents from the burden of a criminal record. And we'll be right back.
Hi, this is Willie Nelson from NORML. For 30 years, NORML has provided a voice for the millions of Americans who smoke marijuana responsibly. 72% of the public support a fine only, no jail, for social use of marijuana. And yet, 724,000 Americans were arrested on marijuana charges last year because the politicians haven't yet gotten the message. To learn how you can help, contact NORML at www.norml.org.
Welcome back. Now with something by Rick Steves. We need to get smart about marijuana. March 26. As a parent helping 2 children navigate their teen years, and as a travel writer who has seen firsthand how Europe deals with its drug problem, I've thought a lot about U.S. drug policy, particularly our criminalization of marijuana. Europe, like the U.S., is dealing with a persistent drug abuse problem, but unlike us, Europe, which treats drug abuse primarily as a public health issue rather than a criminal issue, measures the success of its drug policy in terms of pragmatic harm reduction. Europeans seek a cure that isn't more costly than the problem. While the U.S. spends its tax dollars on police, courts, and prisons, Europe fights drug abuse by funding doctors, counselors, and clinics. European Union policymakers estimate that for each euro invested in drug education and counseling, they save 15 euros in police and healthcare costs. Similar estimates have been made for U.S. health-based approaches by the Rand Corporation and others. While Europeans are as firmly opposed to hard drugs as we are, the difference in how they approach marijuana is striking. Take the Netherlands. with its famously liberal marijuana laws. On my last trip to Amsterdam, I visited a coffee shop, a cafe that openly and legally sells marijuana to people over 18. I sat and observed the very local, almost quaint atmosphere. Neighbors were chatting. An older couple who apparently didn't enjoy the trendy ambiance parked their bikes and dropped in for a baggie to go. An underage customer was shooed away. Then a police officer showed up, but only to post a warning about the latest danger from chemical drugs on the street. Some concerned U.S. parents are comforted by the illusion of control created by our complete prohibition of marijuana, but the policy seems to be backfiring. Their kids say it's easier to buy marijuana than tobacco or alcohol. You don't get carded when you buy something illegally. Meanwhile, Dutch parents say their approach not only protects their younger children, but it also helps insulate their 18 and over teens from street pushers trying to get them hooked on more addictive and profitable hard drugs. After a decade of regulating marijuana, Dutch anti-drug abuse professionals agree there has been no significant increase in pot smoking among young people, and that overall cannabis use has increased only slightly. European and U.S. government statistics show per capita consumption of marijuana for most of Europe, including the Netherlands, is about half of that of the U.S., despite the criminal consequences facing American pot smokers. When it comes to marijuana, European leaders understand that a society must choose: tolerate alternative lifestyles or build more prisons. They've made their choice. We're still building prisons. According to Forbes magazine, 25 million Americans currently use marijuana. Federal statistics indicate that 1 in 3 Americans has used marijuana at some point, which makes it a 113 billion untaxed industry in our country. The FBI reports that about 40% of the roughly 1.8 million annual drug arrests in the U.S. are for marijuana, the majority, 89%, for simple possession. Rather than act as a deterrent, criminalization of marijuana drains precious resources, clogs our legal system, and distracts law enforcement attention from more pressing safety concerns. But things are changing. For example, in Seattle, Initiative 75, which makes adult marijuana use the lowest law enforcement priority for local cops, was recently reviewed after 4 years in action. The results clearly show that during that period, marijuana use did not measurably increase, and street crime associated with drugs actually went down. More and more U.S. parents, lawyers, police, judges, and even travel writers feel it's time for a change. Obviously, like Europeans, we don't want anyone to harm themselves or others by misusing marijuana. We simply believe that regulating and taxing what many consider a harmless vice is smarter than outlawing it. Like my European friends, I believe we can adopt a pragmatic policy towards marijuana with a focus on harm reduction and public health, rather than tough-talking but counterproductive criminalization. The time has come to have an honest discussion about our marijuana laws and their effectiveness. We need to find a policy that is neither hard on drugs nor soft on drugs, but smart on drugs. Again, that was by Rick Steves. From the Alliance, Wednesday, February 20th, 2008. Even ONDCP has a moment of clarity. As a person who is in recovery, I know firsthand what happens with addiction and recovery. Addiction can strike anyone, and the consequences can be severe. However, even the worst of raging alcoholics can have a sudden realizations. These realizations can transform into an opportunity to change, so that an addict can rehabilitate him or herself into a person fighting their disease, rather than succumbing to its devastation. In Alcoholics Anonymous, they call such realizations a moment of clarity. The Office of National Drug Control Policy has had such a moment 1 year ago, with their press release advocating harm reduction as the appropriate response to prescription drug abuse. Nowhere in this press release is a call for harsh laws against the users and dealers of prescription medications. Nowhere is there a call for mandatory testing, of invasive searches, of seizures. It is a reasonable response that they are advocating for. This moment of clarity was repeated last month with another press release advocating education as the solution, not incarceration or surveillance. Unfortunately, it also appears to be just a moment of clarity in the ONDCP's ongoing addiction to the drug war. Just last week, they were back to their old habits, a complete relapse. I should qualify. Relapses for addicts tends to result in amplification of the addiction and its negative aspects. For some alcoholics, when they relapse, they have psychotic breaks. ONDCP has shown the same behavior, accusing doctors of politicizing the medical marijuana debate. Paranoid delusions often have projection as part and parcel to the delusions. A political entity is accusing a medical entity of politicizing something. Sounds like the pot calling the porcelain black. At this point, the ONDCP is rejecting what lay people say about marijuana's benefits from their personal experience, the absence of any fatalities ever as a direct result of marijuana use, the paradox of synthetic THC as a Schedule III drug, meaning THC does have medical value, the will of people in 12 different states, the statements and analysis of thousands of researchers, and now the statements and analysis of thousands of doctors, all of whom are saying that marijuana is a useful medicine. That's millions of people saying we need to look at the medical side of things. Rather than accepting this, the UNDCP has apparently gone paranoid schizophrenic, convinced it's all a conspiracy against them, now including the 124,000 doctors from the American College of Physicians as part of the plot. At what point do we recognize when someone is being clearly unreasonable, not because they don't have the capacity to understand, but because their addictions are speaking for them? Can we find a way to help the ONDCP and the rest of the country out of this crazy addiction to the drug war? Stay tuned. We'll find out when we come back.
Georgia.
Hi, this is Willie Nelson. Alcohol prohibition didn't work in the 1920s, and marijuana prohibition isn't working today. It's time we stopped arresting responsible marijuana smokers. It's the fair thing to do.
For more information, contact NORML, the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws. Call toll-free 888-67-NORML or visit their website at norml.org.
And welcome back. And this, a step in the right direction towards sanity. The Ninth Circuit rejects blanket drug testing of public employees, March 20th, 2008, San Francisco. Government job applicants may not be randomly drug tested absent evidence that their on-the-job impairment would pose a legitimate safety risk to others, according to a unanimous ruling last week by the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. The ruling struck down an Oregon city's policy mandating all public applicants undergo suspicionless urine testing for the presence of certain illicit drug metabolites. The court decided that the city of Woodford's desire to maintain a drug-free workplace was not sufficient enough to override an individual's constitutional protections to be free from unreasonable searches. The Ninth Circuit based its decision on a 1997 U.S. Supreme Court ruling, Chandler v. Miller. In that case, the court rejected a Georgia law that sought to require random drug testing for all political candidates, determining that the statute was unconstitutional because it diminishes personal privacy for a symbol's sake. Similarly, the Ninth Circuit determined the city's policy is unconstitutional as applied because it failed to demonstrate a special need to screen a prospective employee for drugs. The city posits that it has a substantial and important interest in screening public employees for three reasons. Drug abuse is one of the most serious problems confronting society today. Drug use has an adverse effect on job performance. And children must be protected from those who use drugs or could influence children to use them. No doubt these problems are worthy of concern, but there is scant, if any, indication that on account of them, the city has special needs of sufficient weight to justify an exception to the Fourth Amendment's requirement of individualized suspicion. The case is Lanier versus the City of Woodburn. And now, events coming up. The 37th Annual Ann Arbor Hash Bash, Saturday, April 5th, high noon at the Diag of U of M. Immediately following the Hash Bash is the Monroe Street Fair. The Monroe Street Fair is a celebration street fair that features free musical entertainment and vending, 10 a.m. to 6:30 p.m. The music starts about 1 p.m. just after the Hash Bash. They are looking for volunteers throughout the day. They need people to be stationed at barricades at each end of the street from 10 a.m. to 6:30 p.m. All you have to do is hang out, and if an emergency vehicle needs to get through, open up the street. An emergency vehicle has not had to be let through so far. Trash pickup throughout the day and at the end of the day. Unloading of the truck between 10 and 11 a.m. and loading everything back into the truck between 5:30 and 6:30 p.m. If you can volunteer, please email Charlie at info@monroestreetfair.com. Just let him know you want to sign up for an hour or so of volunteering. It really is a piece of cake. You can find more information at monroestreetfair.com. And Detroit Liberation Day. Detroit Liberation Day is coming up May 3rd and should be a blast to attend in beautiful downtown Detroit at Grand Circus Park. The day is full of speakers, music, and a march at 420. Come on down and spend a great afternoon in Detroit. I went to my first Detroit Liberation Day last year and had a great time. This will be their 9th annual event. You can find more info at detroitliberation.org. Thanks for watching. That's it for this edition of Oakland Normal News. I'm Greg Pisecki in for Mikey Evans, saying stay smart and stay safe. Take care.